Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Bridge. I'm Tristan.
And I'm Sam.
And I'm Kevin.
And we've got a pretty good episode. It's going to be a good one, guys.
Got lots going on.
We've had a little break. We got to catch up.
Yep, you bet.
I think we'll start things off by talking about what we read over the summer, maybe, before we get into science fiction, science fact. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
And I just want to do a shout out. Anybody who's listening to us on CFR Radio in Guelph, college radio station, 93.3 FM. Thanks for being here. Anybody who's listening to us on any of the other platforms, thanks for listening. If you haven't already subscribed, consider doing so if you like this kind of stuff, and maybe share it with a friend who you think might enjoy it as well. We really appreciate that.
You can find us on any platform that you enjoy your regular podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much anywhere else as well.
And we're going to end this episode off by sharing with you the conversations that I had with a few people at Fan Expo Canada a few weeks ago in Toronto. We had some recommendations from some science fiction and fantasy fans. So stick around to the end of the episode to hear that. And for those who participated and we saw at Fan Expo, thank you for coming out. We had a blast with everyone. We really appreciate you.
And with that, let's make our way over to the bridge.
Guys, before we get into science fiction, science fact, I just want to give a shout out and apology to the good people of Waukesha, Wisconsin. We heard from a couple of Waukesha, and maybe I'm still pronouncing it wrong. And so this is what happens if you reach out to us. We will respond. And Spring Jack in Waukesha corrected me on my pronunciation, which I believe I called Waukesha. And we have two listeners there, and we're happy to have you both. And Spring Jack is hoping that we will cover something by J.G. Ballard or Stanislaw Lem in the future, and we will absolutely put that on the reading list.
Yeah, so let's catch up a little bit on what we read this summer, because one of the books that I did read was recommended by one of the emails we got, which was Solaris by Stanislav Lem, which has been on my list for a long time. I don't know how I've not read this book, but it is absolutely fantastic. I also watched the Tarkovsky film from the early 70s, Russian film, and also a fantastic film. Criterion did a release of this film as well. But the book is so good. It's so moody, and it kind of reminds me a bit of a lot of the themes that Peter Watts has in Blind Sight, the whole intelligence versus consciousness, and really, really great book, and mysterious and kind of creepy. So Solaris, and thank you for suggesting that one. It prompted me to do so this summer, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So if you haven't read Solaris yet, go check it out. Beautiful book.
Cool. Yeah, I got to check that out too. You threw down the gauntlet there, Tristan, and said we need to read more of the Expanse series. So I took that to heart, and I started reading book 4 and book 5. That was Nemesis Games and Babylon's Ashes by James S.A. Corey. And for anybody who's not familiar with this series, it's also been made into a television show that's quite popular. It's a space opera. Great, endearing characters that you really want to get to know and want to root for. James S. Corey is actually just a pen name for two gentlemen, Daniel Abram and Ty Frank. And that series has all sorts of books in it. Once you get sucked in, you just want to finish them all. So there's action, there's good character intrigue, there's some aliens, there's a solar system full of humanity and different factions and some good politics and great intrigue. So I read 2 of those books so far this summer.
I'm a huge fan of those, that whole series, the TV series and the books. I read, timely for our fantasy segment coming up, I read Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry, which was a really nice sort of fun beach read. And I spent a fair bit of time at the beach this summer. I also read...
That's also a Hugo nominee this year.
Oh, it is? I didn't realize.
Yeah, for best new writer or best book, yeah.
Oh, it is so readable and a really nice, fun read. I also read Out of the Dark by David Weber, and that's just like a classic, alien invasion. It's like if Tom Clancy wrote an alien invasion book, this would be your book. I'm also reading, and she was on the show, sort of inspired me to pick it up, is The Sun Chronicles by Kate Elliott.
Oh yeah, I want to read that one too.
It's good. It's a good. I'm having trouble picking which one I want to read at night right now. So.
I'll bet that's tricky. Hey, you know which one I forgot? I did read, and I should have mentioned, and I just forgot all about it. Was a John Scalzi book, his latest, the Kaiju Preservation Society, which was a nominee for Hugo as well. And it was a really good book. I recommend it. It's an action filled one. Really interesting concepts. Where did Godzilla come from? Well, John Scalzi's got an idea of where he came from, and humanity is mixed up in parallel worlds. It's a great read and funny. John Scalzi is a great author. I actually listened to it, and Will Wheaton was the narrator for that one, and I think he was a perfect narrator for it myself, because he's kind of ironic and it's hard to take him seriously, and that's exactly what's needed for this book.
Yeah, I read that as well last year and thought it was it's fun. It's kind of high stakes. It's not going to melt your brain with new ideas and all that kind of stuff, but it's Scalzi. It's just fun. And he's got a new one out called Starter Villain, which is coming out soon. So maybe we will try and talk to John again sometime, because he's a fun guy to hang out with.
Yeah, right on.
I do want to mention another one I read this summer, which was recommended on a science fiction group that I think that we're all a part of online. And it's called In Ascension by Martin McInnes. And this stands out because it's actually nominated for the Booker Prize. And usually science fiction is not something that makes it there. It's just a gorgeous novel. It reads more like literature. It's very light on the science fiction, but what a beautiful, heartbreaking at times book. This is Martin McInnes is a Scottish author, and he's just a young guy who's getting recognition as one of the UK's most important authors today, and I highly recommend it. It came out earlier this year. That's In Ascension by Martin McInnes. Go check that one out if you want to read some really beautiful literature with a little twist of science fiction.
Cool.
So, Kevin, have you got some science fiction, science fact for us?
Oh, I do. Always something going on. Science fiction, science fact, kind of trying to find the intersection of what's happening in science today. That's also science fiction-y. It's hard not to go down the road of AI. I do try hard not to go down the road of AI when thinking about these, but there's such good fodder. And I read about an interview with a gentleman who works at OpenAI, which is this California company that came up with ChatGPT and DALL-E 3 and some of these large language models that are so prevalent these days, being used by Microsoft, etc. And, everybody talks about superintelligence and about how they're going to destroy the world, Terminator 2 style, Judgment Day. And, maybe that could happen, right? They can, once you've got an artificial intelligence that's smarter than us, maybe they can take over our power grids and take over our nuclear weapons and create havoc to try to, to protect themselves. And that doomsday scenario can only occur if AIs are not aligned with humans, like if they become combative to us, as though they don't like us in some way. And they call this, AI researchers call this the alignment problem. How do we align AI with human goals, human morality, human ethics, so that they don't want to kill us, right? Like this is a self-preservation thing. So this gentleman's job at OpenAI is to head up a team called Super Alignment. So how can we, and they're figuring out right now how to align artificial intelligences with humanity, which it just blew my mind that they're already thinking about this. And of course, the tie-ins to sci-fi here are legion. It started with Isaac Asimov and the 3 laws of robotics, right? The whole idea there is we don't want robots trying to kill us. So baked into their programming is the very first rule is that a robot may not injure human beings or through inaction allow humans to come to harm. But what we're seeing is that that's actually a really hard thing to implement. Isaac Asimov just waved his hands around and said, we'll just program it in. Well, this gentleman at OpenAI is part of a team trying to figure out how to do that. I think his name is Jan Leek, and he heads up this team. And he thought about it, and he said a few things in this interview that I thought was absolutely fascinating. As he says, all this idea about AIs jumping out and trying to take over the world can only happen if they escape their confines inside of a server. And I thought, well, that's kind of true. Like they would have to escape and self-replicate, and he has a term for this, a very scientific term. He calls it self-exfiltration, and how this thing could escape, how it could self-exfiltrate. It could only happen if the safeguards are not in place, or if the AI is able to trick people to allow it to escape, or if it's able to convince people to escape. So he actually talks about in this interview about some philosophical ideas about how we can contain AI. And it occurred to me that this is our first AI defense team, right? This is humans trying to defend ourselves against AI. I mean, maybe there are others, but this is the first one that I've actually heard of. This team is paid for by OpenAI, which tells me that they are prioritizing it, so they see it as a very real threat. Anyway, I just wanted to introduce that. What do you guys think about this whole idea of a AI defense team, super alignment team over at OpenAI?
Yeah, I absolutely want an AI defense team in place and more of that. To me, it seems like we've been marching ahead with AI and pushing ahead with AI at a rate beyond most people's understanding. And I think putting it without sort of safeguards in place, it's easy to consider it harmless. Like when you look like got cute photos in artwork and stuff like that online. But there's a real serious issue down the road, and it's outside most users' understanding. And I think when you have technology that lies outside most user outside the understanding of most users, then you create a great space for problems down the road and or immediate problems. So we're already encountering ethical issues that we haven't created answers or policy for. So yes, I'm all for it, and I think there needs to be government action involved as well. Like I think we need to be more cognizant of the issue. We need to move faster on this than we are. But if you look at how quickly governments and policy and decision makers move on these things, I don't hold out a lot of hope that it's going to end up in a responsible place. I think we're going to go through some grief with AI in the near future before we get a handle on things. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Ever wondered what it takes to make it in the movie business? Peel back the curtain with 4-6 Success Filmmaking. 4-6 Success Filmmaking is where filmmakers share their stories and the secrets.
It's beyond competitive out there.
There have been movies that it's taken me 10 years to get made.
Don't wait to create. Like, you've got to just keep making stuff.
Tune into 4-6 Success Filmmaking for your dose of cinematic realness, direct from the voices that have lived it.
Well, it's already been affecting, I'd say, a sector of our world that we didn't really think. Like, did you really think that AI was going to come for the artists? Like, I don't. Did it?
No.
We all thought, the Matrix stuff and the war and them being more physically violent, but of course that comes before robots. And then we see them doing stuff to our computers or affecting the grid and this stuff, and it's no, it just went right for artists who barely make money in the first place. So I think that's a good testimony to the fact that it's going to be unpredictable. I do believe it's going to be. We won't be able to predict how to defend necessarily. I think we can do the best that we possibly can, but I don't think you can predict what's going to happen with it next. It's gone way too fast. Even in the last 12 months alone, the jump is ridiculous.
No, it's crazy. Well, Jan in this interview said, when asked, well, do you think that GPT-4, the current level, would be able to social engineer an OpenAI staff to allow it to copy its own, the weights of its neural network model outside of the servers. And he says, well, we haven't conclusively proven that it can't, which is and if we think about it, GPT-4 is the worst large language model we're ever going to have, and it's only going to get better from here. So if they can't conclusively prove that it can't social engineer a human to be able to copy it at this stage, there's good reason to be worried, or there's good reason to have teams like this super alignment team over at OpenAI.
And still, this technology is only like just really good predictive text, right? Like it's not thinking on its own. It's still just predictive text. It's just really darn good at it to the point where it can make a short story.
Yeah, and I mean, it comes down to the question of what it's thinking. But you're right, it doesn't have an internal dialogue. Like as of right now, you prompt it a question and it ruminates on that one question and then it comes up with a response. And there's no, after that, it's not consciously ruminating and saying, oh, did I do that well? There's no, as far as I know, there's not an internal dialogue on their servers going on. So yeah, but that could easily be implemented, right? Somebody could go in and make one of these large language models think, just maintain state, and its last thought it uses as an input back into its thinking state, and that's kept in memory. And then what? And then it does have internal dialogue, right? It's and that's probably already here. Somebody's probably already done that. Perfect for science fiction plot lines is what it is.
Yeah, endless possibilities. Well, should we talk about the book of the month?
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, the book of the month, which was actually more the book of the 2 month, because we had a little bit of break over the summer, was The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut. And this, I'm a Vonnegut fan. I think that he is one of those very important authors that moved the genre forward, science fiction, but also just literature in general. Some people don't even think of Vonnegut as a science fiction writer and would say, oh, his early stuff, I guess, is. But this is his most science fiction-like novel, The Sirens of Titan. Came out in 1959. It's his second novel. And, I mean, there's so much to say about this book, but when it comes to the plot, there's really... You just can't talk about the plot too much and go into details because there's so much that happens. And to just keep it quite simple, Rumford is our main character who travels into space with his dog, who and the two of them get caught, I believe, between Earth and Mars, into some sort of quantum entanglement, which makes them both become a particle and a wave at the same time.
He calls it the chronosynclastic infundibilium.
Yes. So yeah, Rumford and his dog, they end up somewhere else in the galaxy. They meet a robot alien. You find out that the purpose of the humans was just to come up with one small part to fix one spaceship. Like the ideas are so simple. They're sarcastic. I think in many ways it's important to not just talk about this book, but to talk about Vonnegut and his importance to the genre and just to writing and to young people's lives. Like there's so many of us that would have read Slaughterhouse-Five when we were children or teenagers or young adults, and that was an eye-opening book for myself. Something to tie those two books together, by the way, is the Tralfamadorians, who are in the Sirens of Titan, and also they are characters in, I guess, the flashbacks that the main character in Slaughterhouse-Five has, which makes you think that they're not hallucinations from that book, because you kind of think, well, the main character has PTSD, and are these Tralfamadorians even real? Well, in Sirens of Titan, yeah, they're real, and there's many stories told in Sirens of Titan. It's not one linear narrative book.
And just to pick up on that, Winston Niles Rumford, how he travels back and forth through time, like that's also with the main character in Slaughterhouse-Five, right? That's he can experience time at any, so that's the same idea with how Vonnegut likes to play with time, at least in a few of his books.
Yeah, for sure. Vonnegut is always trying to deal with big subjects. In this one, free will. And something I noticed too was none of the characters make many choices. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but they're kind of put into situations and they kind of deal with it at the time. But none of them choose to go anywhere where they want to be. Choices are made by other people or other circumstances.
I didn't pick up on that. That's neat.
This is also a book that revisiting the themes and revisiting and even just reading what other people are saying about it really helps you put this book together. I have heard that many people have said, I want to like this book, but I can't. And then they go back and they read it and they go, it starts to make a lot of sense. And it's like, well, because some people say that this is his greatest novel. I've heard that many times, said this is their personal favorite or this is his greatest. I do personally like it more than Slaughterhouse-Five. And I've also read Player Piano, which was fantastic, but it's a little more of a slog. This is much more goofy and fun. I think it's worth just talking about Vonnegut separate from this book a little bit, and just to quote. I want to share some quotes with you guys from things that Kurt said in interviews and recordings or in his books, including this one. True terror is to wake up one morning and discover that your high school class is running the country. And these are things he would have said at a time when people weren't talking like this, like this is, we could have saved the earth, but we were too damn cheap. This is one of my favorites. And this is one of the strong themes of Sirens of Titan and many of his books. I tell you, we are here on earth to fart around, and don't let anyone tell you different.
That is my very favorite Kurt Vonnegut quote.
Yeah.
I love it.
And it's really it. We're reading his books to pass the time and to enjoy it as best we can. One of the themes in this book too was just that you just love who's closest to you and who wants to be loved and who's willing to love you back, which sounds a bit cheesy, but that's an important thing. That we've got this ridiculous story of these humans that materialize from nowhere. We've got these ridiculous aliens and robots and spaceships and the science that doesn't add up, but it doesn't really matter because we're just farting around. And I just really, I really relate to that. I appreciate that. I can see this book being a bit of nonsense to certain readers at times and a bit too goofy. And being so sparse. It's actually a good word for this book is jolting. It kind of jolts you one place and jolts you to the next place. And I just find it adorable and sweet. And I just think he was an important writer. And he gets missed a lot. A lot of people don't want the science fiction label and be known as a great writer. And he somehow got away with it. And highly recommend this book, but I'd love to hear what you guys think, because I don't think we've read a book from the 50s before in this group. And I thought this was a suitable book for that. So what'd you guys think?
Well, I think if you like him so much, maybe you should marry him, Tristan.
Go marry Kurt, Tristan.
Yeah, get out of here. Whatever. No, you're great and right and whatever. But for me, the concept was a lot of fun. And I like the concepts of the attack on sort of free will and the exposure that your existence is essentially a meaningless blink. I do enjoy that, but I can't get over the style of his writing, because the book for me in terms of style didn't really age well. And that's why people struggle, I think, with going back to these books. Like at the time, Steve Martin was really shocking with his banjo. Nowadays, it's kind of like not that big a deal, right? Like, some of the concepts.
Banjo.
Yeah, like what was considered edgy in the 60s or 50s and 60s, 50s in particular, but like in the 60s even, are kind of ho-hum now, right? And that's sort of the thing with trying to be shocking and everything in the 60s is just sort of pedestrian in our current context. I mean, the style's kind of wooden and is interesting in terms of like, if you're doing the historiography of writing, sure. But it's kind of annoying to read it now. And I feel like that's the piece that hasn't aged and makes it kind of a struggle. And then then it just kind of gets a bit silly at points, right? And silly's fine. It's not. I think we've gotten a little more sophisticated, and I'm sure they thought they were more sophisticated at the time. They were, compared to books written in the 30s and 40s. And so for me, it's a great twist at the end, and it's kind of a fun, like they're fun elements. Like it's a bit of a slog, and then it's kind of fun, and it's a bit of a slog, and it's kind of fun. And I feel like it's a concept that could be rewritten in a much better fashion by either by whoever. I don't, pick your author. But it's, if that's all you're reading and that's kind of your thing, and you've acquired a taste for it, then that's go for it, do your thing. But for me, I kept seeing great ideas that were executed in a way that was great for the time, but which, if written now, would seem it would like film students opus, right? Like it just doesn't it didn't really hold up for me. So yeah, it's I read a fair bit of Vonnegut when I was a teenager, not this book, but it was weird going back and going, oh, doesn't feel the same as it did when I was 18. And it's a bit like, if I were to watch an episode of the A-Team now, not so great. It's it's just a big van that they're driving around, and why does Mr. T not like The Fly so much, and whatever, so that's where I'm at with this. I'm sure it pissed off many people. I'm going to hear from the good people of Wisconsin. Oh, yeah. But yeah, so that's sort of my take on it. I can't disagree with anything you've said, Tristan. I just don't want to have to read this book again.
It's funny because I if it wasn't Kurt Vonnegut, I wouldn't have liked the book. But because it was Kurt Vonnegut, and I, like you, have read lots of Kurt Vonnegut, and I knew the historical context, I could look at it and appreciate it. And that's the thing, is it's an appreciation with a historical lens. And this is the thing, is whenever we look back at a lot of the classic sci-fi authors, there's misogyny, there's a cultural blindness. There's all these things that are very noteworthy now when you look at that, and it makes it hard to read. So I'll start out with kind of the bad and then work towards the good. Like, for example, the protagonist, Malachi Constant, at one point rapes Beatrice Rumford, right? And that's it's just, oh well, he was the bad guy, it was there to paint him as kind of a rough character. But then things just kind of continued on, and obviously that's a very jarring thing, and at that time was jarring as well. But you wouldn't have written that into a book today, or at least not in the same way. But let's think about 1959. This is pre-hippies, so like this is beatnik time. This is where anti-establishment stuff was not common. And Vonnegut was so cynical. He was cynical about power structures. He was cynical about wealth inequality. He was way ahead of his time. And so when he wrote this stuff, he was super popular amongst young readers. I actually read about this apparently, and a lot of other authors and a lot of book reviewers couldn't figure out, why are people liking Kurt Vonnegut? And I think a lot of it has to do with this anti-establishment, counterculture cynicism. And he's just the most cynical writer. And I kind of love that. Like, I think I like his stuff, as long as I look at it in that historical context. So this book, yes, was a complete random walk, right? The plot is all over the place. I actually read somewhere that, and who knows if this is true, he said that according to the Harvard Crimson, Vonnegut put together the whole of Sirens of Titan in one night. He was at a party where someone told him he ought to write another novel, so they went into the next room where he just verbally pieced together this book from the things that were around in his mind. And if that's true, I could totally see it, right? There are still very good themes, though, right? You talked about this theme of free will. He definitely drew in power and inequality, right? The protagonist is a rich guy, and that becomes like anti the new religion. The new religion of Earth is actually anti-inequality or anti-luck. That was kind of trying to make it so everybody was equal, right? Which he plays with later in other books as well. That's a theme he's carried on elsewhere. And he's not saying it should be that way. He's actually jabbing at that and questioning whether that makes sense. Should we actually make everybody equal? Because that's also a dystopian future. So he plays with these really neat concepts, but the plot itself is pretty weird. I don't think I would read it again, but I didn't hate it if I look at it from the historical lens. That's the way I would say it. I enjoyed my reading of it because of that, because I knew it was Vonnegut and I knew its place in history, and he's just cool, really. Thanks for the book, Tristan. I'm glad you got me reading it.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Anytime.
You should. Our listeners should know that Tristan looks super pissed right now.
No, it's just my resting face.
No, that was angry Tristan face.
All right, so I am going to destroy this next book that Sam. Just kidding.
Well, I mentioned this earlier as part of my summer reading, and I'm most of the way through the book To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, and that will be our book of the month by Christopher Paolini. And some of our listeners, or maybe all of our listeners, will recognize the author's name as the writer behind, or the mind behind, Aragon series. So the Aragon series was written by Christopher when he was young. He was when he graduated from homeschool at the age of 15 and started writing. So, wow. Maybe the first homeschooler not to become a domestic terrorist in history, and in fact, turn his teachings and learnings to good. So,
There's got to be at least a couple who haven't become domestic terrorists.
Maybe one or two. And certainly his parents were excellent teachers by the looks of it. And so the Aragon series is very famous, and he turned his hand in 2020 to science fiction. I don't recall him writing any sci-fi before that. Maybe he has. But we're going to be focused on this great book that he wrote. And so, so that's going to be our book of the month, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. Yeah, Goodreads, it won in 2020. It won the Goodreads Choice Award for Best Science Fiction Novel. So, and I actually have been really enjoying it. So there's a bit of like some of the elements you'll sort of recognize from, say, feels a bit like Becky Chambers, and it feels a bit like, any kind of like, you got some strong alien presence here, and sometimes it's a little cheesy and fun, but it's quite good. So that's what we're reading, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
I've heard great things about this, and I see it on all the bookshelves too, and it's been calling me for a while, and I just haven't pulled the trigger on it yet. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah,
me too. I'm all about cheesy and fun, so I'm happy to chat about it. It's gonna be a good episode.
Yeah.
So is his latest book, Fractal Noise, a sequel or prequel to this one then?
It's a prequel. Yeah.
It's a prequel to Sleep in a
Sea of Stars. Yeah, it's come out this year, but it occurred, I think, 23 years before the events of To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. So I want to read that one as well. That one's Fractal Noise. I'm gonna read that one as well. Great pick, Sam.
Hey,
great pick. Yes. All right, so now let's just move over, and we're going to listen to some recordings from some conversations I had with some fans at Fan Expo. A lot of people I spoke to were at the panel that we did. We did a big trivia panel, which everyone was laughing, and we had a great time with probably about 50 plus people in there, and really enjoyable. So some people came up and gave us recommendations on science fiction and fantasy books to read. And then we were hanging out at the Canadian Podcast Award booth, and people were coming up. We were chatting to them. So thank you so much for listening to us today. And here is the recording from Fan Expo Canada. Okay. And your name again?
Chris.
You've got a book recommendation for us, or a film. What have you got?
A book. I'll go for a book, because it surprised me. It's Stephen King's Fairy Tale.
Okay.
It's more on the fantasy side of things, but it sort of ties in to science fiction. It starts off in the real world, but it's one of those stories that draws you in and King is a master at that. And so it's a little bit of drip at the beginning, but he just gives you enough, in the drip for you to want to know where. And then the world into which our hero goes is grim and unique in terms of fantasy worlds and the way that magic works there. And it's Stephen King, my God.
So it's great.
It really is.
I didn't know. And is this recent? This is recent?
It's one of his most recent. So it's maybe the second or third one. I think he wrote it in the first summer of the pandemic.
Okay.
And it's a really, really worthwhile read.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you telling us.
All right.
What's your name?
My name's Cameron. Pretty big fantasy reader. Used to sell people books, and my go-to recommendation was always the Demon Cycle series by Peter V. Brett.
Okay.
It's a fantasy series with kind of a unique spin on the traditional high fantasy side of things, and I strongly recommend it because I think it was a unique concept. It dealt a lot with the idea of, for lack of a better term, demons that come out of the ground at night, and then humanity has no way to fight them, so it was the struggling to deal with that aspect of surviving instead of fighting, which is the more common concept that you see in fantasy series, and it was phenomenal.
Awesome. And the book series again and the author?
The Demon Cycle was the series. The first book is The Warded Man, and the author is Peter V. Brett.
Okay, awesome. We're going to check that one out. Thank you so much. Hi.
Hi.
You've got a book recommendation for us. And your name?
My name is Emma.
Okay, Emma, what do you got?
It's Button Hill by Michael Bradford. It's like a middle years dark fantasy book about a boy, his sister, their talking dog, and their adventures in the land of the dead.
Oh, wow.
And it was written by my dad, so I felt like I had to mention it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Excellent. This is great. Some local stuff. So from Toronto
From
here?
Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
From Saskatoon.
Yep,
All right.
out west.
All right, awesome. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Great. Hey, how are you?
Good.
And your name?
I'm Chris.
Chris. And you got a book recommendation?
Yeah,
or
it's a sci-fi book series, and I'm sure any hardcore sci-fi fan will probably know this series, but it's my favorite of all time, and for anyone who doesn't know it, it's the Rama series by Arthur C. Clarke. The first book is just by Arthur C. Clarke, Rendezvous with Rama, and the following three he wrote with Gentry Lee, Rama 2, Garden of Rama, and Rendezvous with Rama.
Yes.
And I love these books because they essentially kind of explain the purpose of the universe in its own little way,
Right.
for at least what he would consider the purpose of the universe.
Right.
And I just love that concept. So,
All right, awesome.
my favorite sci-fi series, and wanted to tell everybody about it. So.
All right. No, thank you very much. So I know I have not read the whole series. I have also heard that you don't have to read them in order. Is that true?
The book is kind of its own standalone thing that he wrote, and then the next three you really do have to read in order because they're sequential for sure.
They are. Okay.
Yeah.
And I heard Rendezvous with Rama. You could pick that one up, but that's not the
You
case.
could pick that one up and read it on its own, and you don't necessarily have to finish the other three.
Right.
But that first book inspired
You want
him
start
to
there.
write the other three with Gentry Lee
Right.
and create an expanded universe based on that
Okay.
first book. Yeah,
Okay,
for
excellent.
sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right, no problem.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Thanks.
And hi, how are you?
Hi there.
Your name?
Alex.
Alex, tell us about a book. Is that what you got for us today?
Yeah. So, well, it's my favorite sci-fi series, so almost anything by Lois McMaster Bujold, but a great place to start is the novel Falling Free. It's fairly short, it's self-contained, and it's all about genetic engineering and the kind of the dubious behavior that humans could get up to if they were out beyond normal human laws. And there's a lot of, there are no aliens in this setting. It's all more like human beings are the real aliens kind of thing. So it's very thought-provoking. It's very, very strong on science. In this book, the main character is an engineer, and she drew a lot on her knowledge from her father and older brother, who are also welding engineers. So you can see that come through here. But I would say almost any of her books would be great to do, and she does fantasy as well, actually.
And the author name again in the book you specified?
Okay, the author is Lois McMaster Bujold, and the particular book is Falling Free.
Falling Free.
Yeah,
and that's not a series; that's a one-off.
It's set in the larger universe, but it's a one-off by itself. Yes, there's a distant sort of several hundred years later. One of her other novels kind of picks up some of the threads that were started in this one, but it's completely standalone. You can enjoy it, you can like it or leave it as you like. So it's a
Falling
great place
Free.
to start.
All right, we'll check that one out. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
All right, I'm here with Jesse, and they have some book recommendations, more on the fantasy side, I think. So what do you got, Jesse, for our listeners?
Well, I got a dragon series by Christopher Poloni. It's called The Inheritance Cycle. There's 4 total: Aragon, Aldous, Brissinger, and then Inheritance, the final one. They're all about dragon and dragon riders and how they're going extinct. There's an evil king and a rebellion, and there's multiple countries meshed together trying to take over one final country. In the end, there's even the end of all the books, there's always a big battle, so you don't have to worry about that. It's well written. And it's been my favorite book since grade 4. And I should also mention there are at least 600 pages each.
Thank you so much, Jesse.
No problem. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah. All right. So at Fan Expo, what kind of things have you really enjoyed seeing them?
Meeting guests, merchandise, and swords, and merchandise, and seeing guests. Everything.
Awesome. Who's your favorite guest this year?
Chris Abbott, who voiced Vegeta, and Matthew Lillard voiced Shaggy, and Frank Welker voiced, Scooby-Doo.
Wow, pretty cool. All right. Well, thank you, Daniel. So, Hugsloth at Twitch TV is here to give us a recommendation on something to watch.
Gotta watch Stranger Things, man. New season's coming out soon. Season 4 with some amazing stuff. I feel like it hasn't been talked about that much this year. There's been a lot of shows kind of overshadowing it, but it's good. I hope the next season really kicks ass.
When does the new season come out?
When does it come out? I hope it's soon.
They haven't said yet? They've just
Not officially. I think they only said they're working on it.
Well, they're taking their time, right? They want to stretch this one out because this is the last season.
I hope it's good. At first when they did season 4, I wanted Vecna to be the real Vecna, like from actual D&D. I thought that would have been a great twist.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Hey everyone, I'm here with Artem, and he's got some recommendations for something to read or to watch. What have you got for us?
So basically, Ahsoka and Hugh Disney TV show about a Ahsoka Tano, a Anakin Skywalker Padawan, since a Clone Wars. If someone didn't know, Clone Wars it was animated TV show in from 2011 to 2022. They had the last 7 seasons last year. So this new TV show heading around a time after Rebellion 1 and New Republic began its story. Ahsoka are trying to find a Grand Admiral throne who flew away. And you details you're gonna know watching the first 2 episodes, which already online. And may the Force be with you.
That's awesome. Thanks, Artem. So Jamil and myself are standing in front of the Canadian Podcast Awards booth, and he's got something to tell us about another network of podcasts. Yes. And it sounds like the kind of geeky stuff we're into. So tell us about that, Jamil.
So I'm a part of the United Federation of Podcasts. It is a collection of podcasts with a variety of different themes. So our flagship podcast is Live Long and Podcast, which is a Star Trek podcast. We do a variety of things. So the main operational division does the television reviews, movie reviews. We've reviewed almost every single episode of Star Trek, and we continue to do so. We do also radio live theater. So we take scripts from Star Trek episodes and turn them into radio plays. Usually do that every month. Just recently we did Lower Decks comic book miniseries. We have Locutors of Trek, which is also part of Live Long and Podcast, which does deep dives into the science fiction concepts of the Federation and the world.
Great. Thank you so much, Jamel.
No problem.
So here with John from the Canadian Podcast Awards, and John has an interesting hobby, and you've got to hear about this because a lot of our fans are hardcore into sci-fi, Star Trek, Star Wars, the whole deal. But tell us what you've been doing, John.
So over the pandemic, I picked up an expensive hobby of replicating props from television and film. So mostly Star Trek props, which is a lot of found items from the 80s that are hard to find now. So things like cassette tape cases, old lights, old flashlights, stuff like that.
So last time I was here, you had a bunch of tribbles. Are they here today?
No, I don't have the tribbles here. I didn't bring anything here this time.
Have they filled up your house now?
Not yet. We've got them contained so far. But yeah, those are easy props to recreate. It's just a ball of fur.
Yeah.
Some of like the harder things are phasers. I'm doing a Strange New Worlds phaser right now.
Nice.
So I have a bunch of resin printed parts, and I have some aluminum parts. And then I'm waiting for the electronics components to come in. And I'll put all that together. I've done a dermal regenerator recently from the Next Generation, which is an old highlighter with a light put inside of it.
Oh, wow.
So they would just take random stuff, put lights in it, put like a bit of tape on it, and now it's a sci-fi futuristic doohickey.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, John, from Canadian Podcast Awards. Where can people look up the awards online, or Twitter or Instagram?
Yeah, you can go to campoutawards.ca or Camp Out Awards on most social media services. No TikTok. We are 30 plus years old, so that's not really our domain yet, but maybe if we get an intern, that'll come around.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John.
No problem. Thank you.
So my name is Eris, and I am the creator, producer, and host of the Who and How Club, which is a podcast, blog, and movement. Also an event series. We focus on who people are and how people became the who's that they are today. So just having conversations about life, love, the things that make you tick, and the things that make you who you are and how you identify and how you define yourself. So stuff like that.
Okay.
Where
can we find you?
So you can find the show anywhere at Who How Club on all social media platforms, or whohowclub.com. And you can find me at Only One Aris, ONLY, the number 1, ARYS, as in Sam.
Cool.
Yeah.
Now,
So-
I want to know what science fiction related books or TV shows, movies, what are you into? Because our listeners want recommendations all the time for new stuff. So what is something that people should be paying attention to right now?
Right now, if you're looking for some weird substance, and I'm just speaking from where I'm at right now in my science fiction-y kind of vibe and energy that I have, I'm really obsessed with Dune and the lore of Dune. And we know that those books have been a bit difficult to adapt, but I feel like the latest adaptation that was spearheaded by Denis Villeneuve, it's a great adaptation compared to the past. I know the past ones are a bit classic, but we just found out that the sequel, part 2 to this, which connects to the first book, has been delayed until next year.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of depressed about that. And then also Zack Snyder just released the trailer for Rebel Moon.
Right.
So I'm excited to see what. Yeah.
That's a Netflix movie.
It's a Netflix movie.
Or like a 3-parter or something?
I think it's a 2-parter.
2-parter, okay.
So I'm excited to see what he does, because we kind of need some Snyder energy right now.
Okay.
He's been away from the scene for a while.
All right.
Ever since the DC stuff.
Cool. Well, thanks, Eris.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us on Tales from the Bridge today. We really appreciate you. Next week, we have another fantastic interview with a great guest. You're really going to like this one, so be sure to join us for that. If you have not subscribed or followed or left a review, please do so. Tell a friend. Let us know you're out there. Give us some book recommendations, something you're watching. We'd love to hear from you. We love hearing from everyone, so please consider doing that. Thank you again for joining us today. Until next time.